Thank you for joining us this afternoon. If you're like me, you've been blown away by the size and scale of this event. When I came here, I thought I'd see a few hundred, maybe a few thousand Amazon devotees running around, but when I went to that keynote and saw 18,000 people sitting in the room, I was blown away by that experience. So it's clear to me that the cloud is not just a new idea and a cutting-edge thing, but it's front and center, mainstream. So what we're going to talk about today is an initiative that Fox is undertaking to move many of our legacy on-premise workflows into a cloud-based future. So I'm going to be presenting initially and kind of walking you guys through what my team does and what our strategy is, and then we're going to dig deep on a project we've been working with a startup named SDVI, and then Simon Eldridge will take over and kind of walk through the specifics there. So first I'm going to introduce Fox Networks Engineering and Operations, which is the sort of factory platform, if you will, for Fox Networks Group. I'll walk you through our 2020 vision, which is really sort of a 5-year technology roadmap, and the current challenges we face in terms of adopting cloud and moving some of those legacy workflows to the cloud environment. And then Simon will walk you through what SDVI is doing for us and get into some real technical details there in terms of the specific platform we built out with him in terms of resource management and orchestration. And then some of the vendors that are either already in the marketplace, the Amazon marketplace, and have a cloud solution, or those that we're sort of dragging, kicking and screaming along with us. And then I'll talk about the benefits that I expect to achieve with this system that's launching soon, hopefully the end of this month. And then we'll open up to Q&A at the end. Okay, so my role is to oversee engineering for Fox Networks Engineering and Operations. And basically what we do is we provide production, post-production, graphics, and distribution capabilities to Fox Networks Group. And we support 35 broadcast and cable networks, as well as their digital equivalents here in the US domestically. And I have systems engineering teams that do design build, and then I have several sustaining engineering teams that keep those systems running. And what we've done in the last 4 years is we've taken some of the digital native engineering teams and we've merged them into the traditional legacy broadcast engineering teams to sort of create that cross-pollinated team that understands the legacy systems and all the infrastructure requirements there, but also is willing to try new things and adopt these newer digital technologies and move things into the cloud. So to give you a sense of exactly what we're doing, as I mentioned, we're doing 35 networks in the US. We broadcast over 40,000, it's gone up now since this slide was written, of live content annually. So that's all of the sporting events that we broadcast, but also live events like the Emmys we recently broadcast on Fox, American Idol, So You Think You Can Dance, live shows like that. We handle almost 4,000 programs annually and 330,000 hours of content across all those networks. And we manage that through 3 physical locations. We've got a production and playout center in Los Angeles, one in the Woodlands near Houston, Texas, and then a production center in Charlotte, North Carolina. And as I mentioned, we basically do 3 things. So we support creative processes, so studio production, post-production, editing, graphics creation. And we support the distribution of all of our networks and now increasingly our non-linear program assets out to our broadcast affiliates, out to pay TV operators, third parties for syndication, and increasingly our own TV everywhere over-the-top plays. And then we have that sort of engineering and facilities management function. And you can kind of see the scope of the operation. So we have 13 production control rooms, and that's where basically you'll produce a live show. We support hundreds of graphics and nonlinear editing systems. And then we have 82 distinct satellite distribution paths, so we can support a broad number of networks and alternate programming for those networks. And then you can see all the internal clients we support. So it's not just Fox and Fox Sports, but it's brands you might not associate with Fox, like the National Geographic Channel, for example, whom we have a joint venture with. So we provide all these services to them. They bring the content, and we bring the engineering and distribution capabilities. To give you a sense of our basic workflow, we support that creative process in 4 basic steps. So 1, we provide a strategy and planning function. So whether that's supporting scheduling of content, working with the content suppliers on delivery specifications. So we work with all the television studios and anyone who's producing content to make sure that they're producing it in a format that we can accept and easily distribute. Then we support the production itself in many cases, either by doing that studio production in-house or by working with a third party who might be doing the production, or a field operations team who's doing a live event on site. And so we'll bring all those events back into our facilities. And then we integrate advertising and promotional elements, on-air graphics, and ancillary content, and then we then distribute that out to the world. What I'm going to focus on today is this step number 2 on the distribution section, which is really about bringing content in. We've moved to file-based workflows primarily for all of our program supply. So all the studios are now delivering us digital files, but because of the legacy systems that have been in place, we're still following a very manual on-premise workflow for bringing that content in, preparing it for air. This slide gives you a sense of our long-term strategy, our 5-year roadmap, if you will. And there's 3 basic tenets. One is we want to automate processes wherever we can. We've got a lot of manual, labor-intensive processes that are bound to physical infrastructure, hardware systems that are on-site. We want to look at how to automate those processes both on-premise, but also move those into colo or cloud facilities so we can run them there and then have the human beings manage by exception. So look for the faults and then zoom in on that. So put eyes on glass only when necessary. We're also building out tools and working with the vendor community to provide self-service upstream. So the business decision makers and the creative teams have all the tools at their disposal that they need to produce content, to make decisions, and sort of eliminate that middleman step where you might need an operator role or where the technology in the past may have sort of gotten in the way of the creative process. And then finally, we're looking at ways to push assembly of the content package, if you will, downstream as far as possible. With the advent of all of the TV everywhere and over-the-top type devices, increasingly we can deliver live content feeds to people, but offer personalization or customized experiences or targeted advertising. Something that a digital native operation would know and would be their bread and butter. But in the linear television business, that's not as easily done as it is said. So to get there, we've got sort of this 4-step roadmap. First, we need to look at ways to shift from this hardware-based platform to more of a software-defined platform. It's not as easy to do as you might think. Many of the vendors in our space are not software-first thinkers. They build black boxes and we install them and then our signals flow through those devices. But increasingly, they're adding a layer of software onto that system, or even in the case of some of the vendors like Elemental, which was just bought by Amazon, or in the process of being acquired, has moved to an all software-defined platform. So for video encoding and transcoding, you can do that all in the cloud today. But there's a lot of building blocks and hooks in there that we need to sort of migrate with that. And so part of the problem is getting those vendors, that ecosystem, to start thinking about how do they deploy their service into the cloud. The next step will be to, once we've got all the building blocks in place, start to move some of our end-to-end workflows into cloud and start thinking cloud first. And then ultimately, we want to get to a place where we can do this sort of play out and dynamic assembly in the cloud, so we can create n number of versions of any given network based on who's watching and what they're watching on and when they're watching and what device they're using and what we might know about them, their interests, and so forth. How we are measured is really about our productivity and our labor efficiency. So as you can see here, we've worked very hard over the last several years to try to really drive down that unit cost through automation, through multi-channel playout, by moving to software-defined systems. So as you can see, as we have scaled the number of networks under management in any given facility, we've been able to drive that per network cost down quite a bit. But things are starting to plateau a bit as that technology platform stabilizes. The first wave was moving to file-based workflows, and all those systems needed to be upgraded. Now we're there, but you're still managing a capital-intensive on-premise platform. So the next step is to start moving some of these things into the cloud so we can be more dynamic and drive that unit cost down even further. Okay, so the project that we're working on with SDVI is essentially to automate the process first of bringing content into the facility. So we're starting with file-based program delivery, and we're looking at ways to automate the ingest, quality control, evaluation, and correction process, and then transcoding as needed so that we can prepare content for air and do that in an automated fashion and do it in the cloud first. So as you can see, there's several steps that we have to follow in the process. So let's take an example of National Geographic Channel. So they have 3 networks: National Geographic Channel, Nat Geo Mundo, which is their Spanish language channel, and then Nat Geo Wild, which is their sort of nature content play. They will send us an asset in an MXF file format, along with a metadata payload that describes the content, and they'll send that to us via Signator Sparrow. So it's coming in-house, and it's coming in a secure and accelerated manner. So we're moving large files, 15, 20 gigabyte files in this manner. But then once it enters into our facility, we run it through a waterfall type process, which goes sort of station to station, operator to operator, to first verify that content, make sure it's meeting our specifications. Did it match our supplier spec? We may have to manually re-enter data that is not necessarily in the supplier spec. We need that show description. You didn't give us that. Or we need a TMS ID or what have you. Then we want to run it through some of these sort of black box quality control platforms, which are starting to move into software-defined model. But today, a lot of times it's sitting down at a vector scope and waveform monitor with headphones and then watching the content. Obviously not a very scalable process. And then each step of the way, we might find an issue here or there, but typically things pass right through. We still have to do this check. We have to make sure that we have the closed caption information. We're obligated per FCC regulations to provide closed captioning for the hearing impaired. We're obligated to follow certain specifications around audio levels to make sure that the difference between audio programming and advertising isn't out of specification per the CALM Act. All of these things take time and currently take humans sitting in front of a pane of glass. And then finally, we can move that into our playback center and get that out to the consumer. So obviously, this takes a lot of time, very manual, labor intensive. So what we've done is we've hired SDVI, they're a startup, to build this cloud-native platform for us to automate this process, to match content against our spec, run it through all those QC processes in an automated fashion, and then only present to operations team if there's a problem that we need to intervene and correct. And so with that, I'm going to hand off to Simon Eldridge, the Chief Product Officer for SDVI.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, I'm Simon Eldridge. I'm responsible for products at SDVI. SDVI was founded in 2013. We're headquartered in Silicon Valley. We're a relatively small company. And it was founded by people who have come from traditional media technology backgrounds. We've been doing this for years. I've spent the last 15 years building MAM systems and workflow management systems and media software. And really, we saw an opportunity for doing things in a slightly different way to how they'd been done historically. So about a year ago, we were talking with Fox. Chris explained what their strategy was, what their goals were for the future, much like he just did then. And we explained how we thought things were going to go. And we decided to embark on a project to migrate that media supply chain to the cloud. In terms of the things that SDVI are trying to solve, the first one is really about spinning up and down media infrastructure in minutes. And the goal of this is traditionally in media enterprises, the idea of launching a new service or launching a new channel takes months. And it's planning, and it's purchasing capital equipment, and it's deployment, and it's testing, and it's everything else. So the idea that you could programmatically say, here's the infrastructure that I need, here's the service that I'd like to be able to deploy, and click a button and do that dynamically, obviously gets you to revenue much quicker. The next one is the notion of shared infrastructure across those different services. So in a traditional environment, and Fox is a great example of this, they do NFL coverage, and they do NFL coverage for exactly 19 weeks a year. The rest of the year, all of the equipment that's there to support that particular service is sat there basically doing nothing. So the idea of being able to build a pool of infrastructure that can be shared across those various different services is obviously going to increase your utilization, and it's also going to give you the flexibility to use that infrastructure in different ways for different services as required. The next part is really about providing that infrastructure on demand. So rather than having to go out and buy all of the equipment that you need for a particular service, and deploying all of that equipment to deal with the peak loads as content comes in, this really allows you to dynamically deploy the infrastructure that you need based on the load at any particular time, and then scale up and scale down as needs change. One thing that we believe very strongly was there's no point at all in trying to reinvent the wheel in terms of the core tools that are used as part of the workflow. So we've tried very hard to integrate as many of those tools that are needed in the workflow as possible. So we've basically have an architecture where we build connectors to transcoders and file transfer engines and QC engines and various other tools. And I'll explain kind of how that architecture works. The nice thing about this architecture is traditionally when you would deploy a system, you would deploy a system with a specific set of tools, and they were the tools that were available. As soon as you move to this type of environment, you can have a pool of all of the tools, and you can match the best tool to the job that you're trying to do. So using analytics, you can start working out which transcoder is best for this type of job, which QC engine is best for this type of job, and dynamically change those as you go. The other thing that this obviously facilitates is a move to OPEX for the media supply chain. I think Fox are not alone in basically concluding that capital should be spent on creating or content. So being able to actually move the supply chain to an operating expense model, and that operating expense basically scaling up and down based on the volume of throughput that you've got is obviously very attractive. And it also actually gives you complete transparency and tracking capability of what the cost of the media supply chain is. So historically, that was very difficult because you would go out and you would buy a lot of equipment and you would run it, and then working out the cost of running a piece of media through that entire life cycle was very hard to do. So when you now have per minute incremental unit costs for every tool in a chain, you know exactly what a piece of media costs to go from where you received it to where you put it out. And then the last part is really about infrastructure, analytics, and modeling. So gathering as much data as you can about the processes that you're going through, the efficiency of the tools, the efficiency of the underlying infrastructure that's being used to run the tools, and then feeding that back into the process to actually make intelligent decisions about how that infrastructure is deployed going forward. So how that all stacks up in terms of the platform that we've put together. At the very bottom layer, it's infrastructure, right? So we're managing the infrastructure, and this is compute, storage, networking infrastructure. And at the moment, the entire system is completely AWS-resident, but the notion is that the resources that we're managing could actually be anywhere. Our platform itself lives on AWS, but we could be reaching into facilities and actually managing resources there as well. On top of that infrastructure is the ability to provision the most appropriate third-party applications for a particular task as part of that lifecycle. So this could be transcoding, file-based QC, any of those tools that actually make up part of the workflow. In terms of how we manage those third-party applications and the infrastructure, this is where our library of adapters come in. So we now have a library of around 15 different adapters. The prioritization of those was obviously driven by Fox because of our goal was really to be able to replicate the workflow that they have in a cloud-based environment. But we will continue to build out that library of adapters. And ultimately, we'd like to get to the point where we can allow the rest of the ecosystem to actually build their own adapters and expand even further the capability of the platform. On top of the adapters are our platform services. So this is really the core engine of our platform. So these are effectively microservices that allow you to do things like the resource management, the optimization, the analytics, and the data gathering. And those services are then exposed through applications which we've built on top of that platform. These are web-based applications. The intent is that in the first half of next year, we will launch this platform as SaaS. There are two different deployment models. One is isolated silos for big customers like Fox. And then there's obviously also an opportunity here to launch this platform as a multi-tenant SaaS solution where some of the smaller guys can actually come in and simply rent the use of the tools within the platform. So in terms of what we've built for Fox, and we are almost a year into this, we are 22 days away from launch. We're currently running in parallel operation. So at the moment, what's happening is that the content is going to the Los Angeles facility and going through the existing workflow, but it's also being routed up to AWS, and we're running a completely automated workflow and then delivering the content back to Los Angeles. So they have the ability to basically do both. In terms of what Chris described as moving all of this capability to the cloud, that would obviously be a very ambitious thing to do in the first instance. So we picked a use case which made sense for the starting point, and that was the 3 Nat Geo networks. So there's National Geographic Wild, and Nat Geo Mundo. That content is being delivered up to AWS. It's actually arriving in Fox's S3 bucket, which we have permission to manage. So we get notifications when content arrives. That's how the content gets there. Fox have also stood up a ServiceNow portal, which is their work order system, which the external clients have the ability to log into and say, I'm going to deliver this content, and then they enter the metadata through that portal. And that metadata is things like, what network is this content for? What's the runtime of the material? What's the air date? And we use that information to then drive the priorities of the workflows to determine how many resources are needed to process that content. There is also a backup path, and the backup path is we've integrated directly with Signient and Aspera, and they can log directly into our interface and literally just upload the content and sidecar metadata files. So in the case where there's a problem with the customer portal, we can get that information directly. The one other thing that we do is as content passes through the lifecycle, we're actually passing status information back to the ServiceNow customer portal. So we'll pass back things like, okay, content's been received, yes, it's been validated, you delivered the right thing, QC's been passed, it's been normalized, it's been delivered to Los Angeles. So from a client perspective, they get complete transparency of where each piece of content is within its lifecycle. In terms of how Fox users log into our applications, they wanted the ability to have single sign-on, use their existing domain authentication. This is also two-factor authentication. So we did an integration with Okta, who I believe are out in the other hall. And that basically allows us to have absolutely no knowledge of the users who are logging in whatsoever, which is actually quite nice. In terms of the adapters and the tools which we've integrated with, there are really 3 categories. The first category is the content quality check, and these tools are designed to do automated analysis of the content and actually check that the quality of the content is as you would expect it to be. There's then a second category, which are content normalization tools or transcoders or some kind of content conversion tools. These could be video transcoders, audio transcoders, but even just rewrapping on some occasions. And then the third category are the content captioning tools. And EEG is used to add captions to the content. So when the caption files are delivered separately from the video material, we can automatically add those captions to the material. And the Nexidia tool is actually used for QCing the captions. So we can do things like check that the language of the captions are the same as the language of the audio. And you can also do things like realignment. So the first step when content arrives within our system, before we actually use any of these tools at all, we do some light analysis on the material. What was it that was delivered? And then we compare that to Fox's delivery spec and basically say, have these people delivered the right thing? So the first thing that we're able to do is as soon as the content arrives, if it's not the right thing, we can kick it straight back to the client and say, actually, you've delivered the wrong thing, and then it doesn't end up sat in a loop waiting for somebody to look at the material. The next thing that we do is we use one of the QC tools, not strictly to do QC on the content itself, but to do a deeper level of analysis of what the content is and therefore determine what processes that content needs to go through to be able to support the delivery to the ultimate platform. So we do things like, is there 5.1 audio? Is there also stereo audio? Are there captions present? Just basic, are the components of the program actually there? And then having determined that information, we then know which tools to then deploy to do the normalization. So which transcoders do we need? Do we need to do captioning? Do we need to do audio processing? And then all of that process is completely automated. And then you end up with a distribution-ready piece of content, which we then run again through a QC for pure quality analysis. If it passes the quality checks, what we then do is deliver the content directly to Los Angeles using either Signin or Aspera. So when this content is delivered to Los Angeles, it lands basically in their staging storage, and then we also send a BXF message to their playout automation system to say, you have a new piece of air-ready content, QC's already been passed, and here's the location of the content within your facility. Obviously, as part of this platform, we've used a significant number of the AWS services to underpin what we've been building, and AWS have been extraordinarily supportive in terms of helping us build out the platform, as have the third-party community in terms of us integrating with those tools. And the next steps are really more ins and more outs. So this is really designed at the moment to automate the preparation of content for linear playout. The intent is to onboard additional networks, so the other networks will start delivering their content through the same system, and increase the number of distribution platforms, so where content needs to go to other places, we'll also automate that as well. So obviously this ecosystem of tools is going to grow in order to be able to support those workflows. In terms of the architecture, this is a bit of an eye chart, so I apologize for that. But I just wanted you to kind of understand how this system has been deployed. So in the top left, you can see the S3 buckets. As I mentioned before, they're not our S3 buckets, they're Fox's S3 buckets. And we use IAM authentication, so we have permissions, different permissions on different buckets. So as content arrives, we actually move it into an in-process bucket. That's where we actually execute all the work. We then move the content to the done folder, which then allows us to then trigger the delivery back to the playout center in Los Angeles. We've actually also created a lifecycle rule on that S3 bucket, so when you've got distribution-ready content, we're also moving a copy off to Glacier for archive. Our core platform, as I mentioned, is microservice-based. So we have different microservices for our job service, for our analytics service, for our resource management service. And those all exist within a VPC. And then within a separate subnet is where we spin up the tools to actually do the processing. So that's where the scalability comes, and we're determining the scalability and the size of each of those farms for the tools, really based on the volume of the content that's coming in. So for the 3 Nat Geo networks, it's currently at around 150 hours of content per month, which is around 4 terabytes of material coming in and being passed through. And then there are some of the vendors, obviously, that are existing SaaS-based solutions. So on the right-hand side, you have Elemental, which is SaaS, and then you have Okta, which is our single sign-on tool. So we're accessing those directly through their APIs. With that, I will hand back to Chris for the impact of what the system's going to do.
All right, thanks, Simon. So as you can tell, we've been hard at work. We basically build most of this from whole cloth, although part of the effort is really to get that ecosystem going, get a lot of those vendors that are in the mix moving into the cloud. So here's the results that I expect to achieve once we migrated onto this system. First, as I mentioned, reduce the labor costs associated with that supply chain. So automating processes and focusing people and their brains on exceptions, not on rote process on each and every particular piece of media. The second key benefit is I automatically get operational resiliency or disaster recovery capabilities by moving things into the cloud. Our model today is I'll ingest in Los Angeles or I'll ingest in the Woodlands, I'll process, and then I'll store and forward to the other facility. But if you think about it, if I have a disaster at one of those facilities, I'm offline. I may have a backup for a few days at the other facility, but really I need to call my suppliers and say, hey, start sending it to that other location. When we flip the switch here, content will go into the cloud first, then be copied to both locations, flipped into the right format for the various playout servers. So we get that sort of DR capability right out of the gate. It's also part of my internal strategy to sort of move my team towards thinking about cloud first. Like when we go build something, we should try to build in the cloud at first if we can. So we're starting with sort of low-hanging fruit, something that's relatively easy to automate, to get the team focused on how to do this. But as you saw earlier, I have a multi-year plan to kind of get the team thinking about how to move into the cloud natively. So yeah, we're not going to move studio production into the cloud. Obviously, you can't move cameras and all that into the cloud. But there are many other aspects of our operation that I think it can be moved into cloud, or at least hybrid cloud operation. So part of this is about a culture shift within the team. And as Simon mentioned, we also want to transition to this pay-as-you-go model. We currently have a very capital-intensive infrastructure. We're spending tens of millions of dollars every year to build and maintain these on-premise systems. So what I want to do is I want to move to this variable cost model. There's benefits both in terms of just the financing of all that, but also in terms of giving transparency into the true costs of a specific operation. So to give the business better visibility into what things cost to do so they can make better decisions. And then obviously with cloud, you can elastically absorb changes in volume. The best example I have here is that a couple years ago we relaunched a network, rebranded it FXX as part of a whole slew of networks that we launched. So the FX network, which most of you I'm sure are familiar with, launched FXX and FXM, which was their comedy and their movie channels. So to get those channels launched, we had to obviously ingest a bunch of new content. Well, we had planned for that. What they didn't tell us was that they were licensing the entire 25-year catalog of The Simpsons, and they wanted to launch with that too. Oh, by the way, right? And then, oh yeah, I need the Spanish language version, and I need the original broadcast version, but I also want a cable version, and I want a special cut for FX Now. And oh, we're going to launch this new Simpsons World product on mobile, so we need the digital versions, and so on. So it wasn't just ingest 525 episodes, it was ingest 525 episodes, but 3 variants of them, and then transcode them into all these derivatives. So how was I going to do that with these sort of legacy systems where I have fixed baseline capacity? It was going to take me months to do all that work. So we had to move these workloads into the cloud. And then I think the final benefit for us and for really the ecosystem and all my brethren here in the room is that we're trying to drag some of these vendors towards this cloud future. So they're building shrink-wrap software with a dongle for the license key, right? How do you install that dongle in the cloud? They're going to have to start rethinking their licensing model, start thinking about a pay-as-you-go model, start thinking about abstraction from the hardware components and running in these cloud instances. And so this project has really started those conversations. And so we're excited about that aspect of it because it's a fairly small marketplace if you think about it. There's only a few customers in the media entertainment space. But I have a feeling that everyone who's in my shoes, like Michael at Turner and others, are asking the same things of these vendors. So we need them to get moving in this direction. And I think it benefits them because they're going to go and put their service into the Amazon marketplace, and they're going to find new customers that they didn't even know they might have.